Step out of the vehicle, now." The voice wasn't loud. It was worse than loud, flat, practiced, already convinced. Blue and red light crawled across the side of the white cargo van like paint that wouldn't dry, turning the pre-dawn Chicago street into a strobe-lit cage. Darnell Price kept both hands on the steering wheel, thumbs resting at 10 and 2 the way his driving instructor had taught him years ago, back when he was learning to look harmless on command. His reflective warehouse vest sat on the passenger seat, folded the way he always folded it. His steel-toe boots were scuffed, his hoodie was cheap, and the smell in the van was the honest smell of labor, cardboard, grease, coffee that had been reheated twice. To the man walking up on his driver's side window, Darnell looked like a forklift operator trying to make it to shift change. And that was the point. The officer stopped at the edge of the headlight beam like he was stepping onto a stage. He was tall, white, mid-30s, with a jaw set so hard it looked like it hurt. His name tag caught the flash from his own cruiser, Lawson. Lawson leaned down, one hand resting on the roof, the other hovering near his belt. "Morning," Darnell said, calm. "What's the reason for the stop?" Lawson's eyes traveled the van the way some people looked at a stray dog they'd already decided was diseased. "Reason is, you're driving a vehicle that matches a pattern." "A pattern," Darnell repeated quietly. Lawson's mouth twisted. "You heard me? License, registration, insurance." Darnell moved slowly, narrating each motion the way he'd learned to do when the stakes were stupidly high. "My wallet is in my back pocket. Registration is in the glove box." "Don't get cute," Lawson said. "Just do it." Darnell felt the first sting of heat in his chest, an anger he didn't allow to rise because anger was a match in a room full of gasoline. He retrieved the documents, placed them between two fingers, and held them out. Lawson took them, glanced once, then, like a magician refusing to reveal a trick, didn't really read. He just flicked through the papers and asked, "Where you headed?" "Work," Darnell said. "Lakeview Logistics, South Dock." "At this hour," Lawson said, like the time itself was evidence. "It's shift change," Darnell replied. Lawson leaned closer, lowering his voice in a way that was meant to sound reasonable, meant to sound like a man offering a young kid a chance to come clean. "You hauling anything I should know about?" Darnell blinked once. "I'm not hauling anything. It's an empty cargo van." Lawson made a small sound, half laugh, half scoff. "Uh-huh." Another cruiser rolled up behind the first, angled toward the curb. No siren, just presence, reinforcement. A spotlight clicked on and pinned Darnell's face, turning the inside of the van bright enough to feel exposed. "Step out," Lawson repeated. "I'm going to take a look inside the back." Darnell's heart thumped once, hard. A light laborer would argue, a scared man would plead, a guilty man would panic. Darnell did none of those. "I don't consent to a search," he said evenly. There it was, the moment when the air changed. Lawson straightened as if the refusal had insulted him personally. "You don't consent." "That's correct," Darnell said. "If you have probable cause, you can proceed the way the law allows. Otherwise, I'm exercising my rights." Lawson smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was the kind of smile that said, "I heard you, and I'm going to punish you for it." "You hear that?" Lawson called, not to Darnell, but to the other officer approaching from behind. "We got ourselves a constitutional scholar." Darnell stepped out slowly, keeping his hands visible. Cold air hit his face. The street was quiet in that half hour when the city held its breath, when only workers and patrol cars were awake. Then he heard it. A forklift beep, distant, rhythmic, familiar, coming from the warehouse entrance half a block away. And with it, the faint murmur of voices, people gathering. Someone from the dock had seen the lights. A second later, Darnell saw them, 3 silhouettes near the chain-link gate, phones already up. One of them was a woman named Keisha who always brought extra gloves to shift. Another was Manny, who never stopped talking. Another was a new guy still learning which doors stuck when it rained. Lawson noticed them too. His posture changed again. He squared his shoulders. This was no longer just a stop. This was a performance. "Hands on the hood," Lawson ordered. Darnell didn't move immediately, not in defiance, just in calculation. Every command had a purpose. Every compliance had a cost. He placed his palms on the hood of the cruiser. The metal was cold and the chill sank into his fingers. Lawson patted him down with unnecessary force, pushing, pressing, treating Darnell's body like an object he could search with irritation. "Spread your feet," Lawson said. Darnell complied. Lawson's voice rose so the dock workers could hear. "You know why we stop vans like this? Because people use them to move stolen goods, tools, electronics, copper wire, you name it." "I'm going to work," Darnell said. That's all." "Sure," Lawson said, and it was a knife hidden in a word. "And I'm sure you bought this van with that warehouse money, too." From the gate, a voice called out, "Hey, that's Darnell! He works with us!" Lawson turned his head, eyes narrowing at the crowd. "Back up, this is police business." Another phone appeared, then another. The quiet street filled with the small electronic clicks of cameras focusing. Darnell stared at the pavement and listened to the sounds. The crunch of boots on gravel, the radio chirp, the steady whine of the spotlight. He felt the humiliation like a weight on his back, but he kept his breathing measured, because humiliation wasn't new. The pattern was. Lawson stepped close to Darnell's ear, voice dropping again. "You want to play lawyer, you can do it downtown." "I haven't done anything wrong," Darnell said. Lawson's hand pressed between Darnell's shoulder blades, forcing him slightly forward. Not enough to be called a shove in a report. Enough to make Darnell remember the pressure. "I decide what's wrong," Lawson murmured. Then Lawson's radio crackled. A dispatcher's voice spilled out in short bursts, codes, addresses, noise. Lawson keyed his mic. "Need a unit to assist. Possible stolen goods transport, subject refusing consent. Crowd gathering." Crowd. Darnell hated that word. It turned witnesses into threats. It turned truth into chaos. A younger officer approached from the second cruiser, slower than Lawson, eyes flicking from Darnell's hands to the phones at the gate. He looked like he'd just finished growing into his uniform. His face carried the expression of someone who knew he was watching something wrong, but didn't yet know how to stop it. His name tag read Evans. Evans didn't say much. He stood to the side, quiet, a hand resting on his belt, gaze fixed on Lawson like he was waiting for a cue. Lawson pulled Darnell's wallet from his pocket with a sharp tug. "This your ID?" "Yes," Darnell said. Lawson held it up to the spotlight. "Darnell Price." "That's me." "And you live... Where's this?" Lawson read the address like it tasted bad. "South Shore." Darnell didn't answer. He didn't have to. But Lawson wanted the silence to feel like guilt. "Where'd you get the van?" Lawson asked. "It's registered to me," Darnell said. Lawson let out a laugh that the cameras could catch. "Registered? Uh-huh. So, it's yours. And you got it how?" Darnell's jaw tightened. A man at the gate shouted, "He bought it last year. He worked overtime." Lawson pointed without looking. "Back up," Keisha's voice, sharp, carried across the street. "Why are you doing this? He's not resisting." Lawson turned fully now, face hard. "Ma'am, I'm not arguing with you. Move back." The gate crowd didn't move. They didn't advance either. They just held their phones steady, which somehow was more threatening than shouting. Darnell felt a vibration in his pocket that wasn't there. His phone. Phantom buzzing because he didn't have it. He'd left it in the van, or Lawson had taken it. He wasn't sure which. Lawson shoved Darnell's ID back into the wallet without care. "You're going to sit in my car while we sort this out." "Am I being detained?" Darnell asked. Lawson leaned in. "You are now." A click, hard plastic and cold pressure closed around Darnell's wrist. Not full cuffs, a restraint strap. Temporary, Lawson would call it. Darnell would call it what it was. Control. Put on his body for the cameras. Darnell didn't flinch, but the dock workers did. Their voices rose in a wave. "Yo, why you putting him in that? He didn't do nothing. Record that." Someone's live stream chimed with a new viewer notification. Rapid fire. The street had turned into a feed. Evans shifted on his feet, looking from the crowd to Lawson. His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't speak. Lawson guided Darnell toward the back seat of the cruiser with a firm hand at his elbow, just enough force to leave no bruise anyone could see, but enough to leave a message. "Watch your head," Lawson said, and didn't mean it. Darnell sat in the back seat. Plastic. Cold. Smelling faintly of disinfectant and old sweat. The door shut with a metallic finality that echoed in his chest. From behind glass, he saw Keisha step closer to the gate, phone high. Manny's voice, shaky with anger. The new guy's face pale. Lawson stood outside, speaking into his radio like he was the calm one. Like Darnell was the problem. Darnell stared at the partition and forced his breathing to stay even. He had been trained for this moment, just not in the way Lawson imagined. Because beneath the hoodie, beneath the boots, beneath the ordinary worker cover, Darnell Price had a government ID that didn't sit in a wallet. It sat in a sealed envelope in a locked drawer where it belonged until the right time. And this language, this performance, was the kind of pattern he had been tracking for months. Lawson thought he'd found an easy arrest. Darnell knew he'd just found a door. And once a door opened, the system had a way of walking through it slowly, legally, relentlessly, until there was nowhere left to hide. They drove him downtown without sirens. That was the first thing Darnell noticed. No urgency, no emergency, no danger. Just the quiet certainty of a man who believed he could move another human being through a machine and nothing would ever come back on him. The cruiser's engine hummed. The city woke in fragments outside the window, brick buildings, a corner store rolling up its metal gate, a bus sighing to a stop with sleepy passengers. Lawson didn't speak to Darnell during the drive. He spoke into his radio instead, shaping the story while it was still wet. Subject was evasive. Refused consent. Crowd became hostile. Possible stolen goods transport. Words were tools. Lawson used them like a carpenter, hammering each one into place so the final structure could stand without the truth. At the precinct, the Sally Port swallowed them. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of bleach laid over something older. Lawson opened the back door and gestured as if he were doing Darnell a favor. Out. Darnell stood, wrists stiff from the restraint strap. What am I being charged with? Lawson's eyes flicked up and down. Right now, detained pending investigation. That's not a charge, Darnell said. No. Lawson replied, almost cheerful. It's a fact. Inside, the booking desk was staffed by a man with a belly that pushed against his uniform and a bored expression that looked like it had been soldered on. Name, date of birth, address, Darnell answered. Calm, precise. Employment, the desk officer asked. Lakeview Logistics, Darnell said. The desk officer typed without looking. Lawson leaned on the counter, watching the screen like he was waiting for it to confirm what he already believed. Any priors? None, the desk officer said after a moment. Lawson's jaw tightened. Darnell could feel it, the little crack in Lawson's confidence, because the machine wasn't rewarding his assumptions. So Lawson did what men like him did when reality failed them. He created his own. Lawson cleared his throat. We need to inventory the van. Darnell's head turned. Without probable cause and without consent? Lawson smiled again, thin and sharp. Policy. Vehicle held pending investigation, inventory search for officer safety. Evans stood behind Lawson now, quiet as a shadow. His eyes met Darnell's for a fraction of a second, an apology that never formed into words. Darnell's belongings were taken, keys, wallet, phone, finally, plucked from the van and dropped into a clear evidence bag. The sight of it made something in Darnell's chest tighten, not because he needed the phone, but because he knew what was happening outside that building. The video, the live stream, the people at the gate. He was cut off from it while Lawson still had full access to his own narrative. They put Darnell in a holding cell, concrete bench, metal toilet, the buzzing fluorescent light that made everything look sick. He sat down slowly, feeling the ache that came from forced stillness. His wrist throbbed where the strap had pressed. Not injury, just a reminder of who had been allowed to touch him and why. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Darnell did not pace. He did not yell. He did not beg. He listened. Every door slam, every radio chirp, every laugh that drifted down the corridor. In the distance, he heard Lawson's voice through a half-open door, easy, joking, confident. Yeah, I got him. He tried that rights talk like he's some kind of lawyer. Another voice replied, older, amused. They always do. Write it clean. Write it clean. Darnell closed his eyes for a moment. That phrase was a confession. The truth was never clean when you had to scrub it. When the cell door finally opened, a sergeant stood there. He was black, late 40s, with tired eyes and a badge that looked heavier than it should. Price, the sergeant said. Come with me. Darnell stood, slow. Am I being released? Not yet, the sergeant said. Interview room. The interview room smelled like old coffee and stale air. A camera sat in the corner, its little red light off. A table, 2 chairs. Lawson sat on one side, relaxed. Sergeant on the other side, arms folded. Darnell sat opposite them. Lawson opened a folder like he was in court. "Mr. Price, we're going to ask you some simple questions about your vehicle and your activities this morning." Darnell looked from Lawson to the sergeant. "I haven't committed a crime." Lawson lifted his hands. "Maybe. Maybe not. But this is the part where you help yourself." The sergeant's eyes stayed on Darnell's face, searching, not for guilt, for the shape of the situation. "Your co-workers got involved," Lawson continued. "Made it a whole thing. You know how that looks?" Darnell's voice stayed level. "It looks like witnesses." Lawson chuckled. "Witnesses? Sure!" Darnell leaned forward slightly. "Do you have a warrant? Do you have probable cause? Or are we just fishing?" Lawson's smile vanished. "We have reason to believe—" "To believe what?" Darnell asked, quiet. "That I'm driving a van while black at 5 in the morning?" The sergeant's jaw tightened. Lawson's eyes hardened. "Watch your mouth." Darnell's gaze didn't break. "My mouth is the least of your problems." For the first time, Lawson looked uncertain, not because he was afraid of Darnell, but because he hated that Darnell wasn't afraid of him. Fear was the fuel. Without it, Lawson had to work harder. "You're refusing to cooperate," Lawson said, writing something on a form with a dramatic flourish. "I'm refusing to waive my rights," Darnell replied. The sergeant exhaled slowly. "Officer Lawson, what's the underlying offense?" Lawson's head snapped toward him. "Potential transport of stolen goods." The sergeant held Lawson's gaze. "Based on what?" "Based on patterns," Lawson said again, like repeating it would make it real. Darnell watched the sergeant's face. A man caught between a badge and a conscience. Lawson pushed the form across the table. "Sign this consent. We search the van. If there's nothing, you go." Darnell didn't touch it. Lawson leaned in, voice dropping into something almost intimate. "You think you're winning. You think you're smarter than us. But let me tell you something. I can keep you here while we check every bolt on that van. I can call your job. I can tell them you're mixed up in an investigation. You want to clock in late? You want to lose that little warehouse paycheck?" The threat landed where Lawson intended, right on survival. But Darnell had built his life around survival. He'd also built it around patience. He stared at Lawson and spoke softly so the words would carry without being shouted. "If you call my job, you'll speak to a supervisor who's already watching this." Lawson blinked. "Watching what?" Darnell's mouth barely moved. "The video." Lawson's face went still for a heartbeat. "You think we don't know," Darnell continued, "about the stops, the language, the pattern you keep saying like it's scripture." The sergeant's eyes widened a fraction. Lawson recovered quickly, slamming a hand on the table. "That's enough. We're done here. Book him for obstruction." The sergeant's head snapped up. "Obstruction? He hasn't obstructed anything!" Lawson's voice rose. "He's refusing lawful orders." Darnell's pulse stayed steady. "An unlawful order doesn't become lawful because you're angry." For a second the room was quiet except for the faint buzz of the overhead light. Then the sergeant stood. "Officer Lawson," he said slow, "step outside." Lawson's eyes flashed. "Sarge, with respect, step outside." Lawson pushed back his chair hard and stormed out. The sergeant waited until the door shut, then turned back to Darnell. His voice dropped. "What is this?" Darnell looked at him with the kind of honesty he rarely offered on the street. "It's exactly what it looks like." The sergeant rubbed a hand over his face, exhausted. "That doesn't help me." Darnell leaned back slightly. "I don't expect it to. But I'm going to say one thing, and you're going to decide what kind of sergeant you are." The sergeant's eyes held his. Darnell spoke carefully. "There are cameras outside this building right now, not official ones, the kind that don't get malfunctioned. You can let Lawson bury you with his report, or you can do your job." The sergeant stared at Darnell, then walked to the door, opened it a crack, and looked down the corridor. Lawson's laughter echoed again from somewhere up the hall. Someone slapped him on the back. Easy, confident. The sergeant closed the door and returned to the table. He looked at Darnell like he was seeing him for the first time. "I'm going to make a call," the sergeant said. Darnell nodded once. "Good." because the machine had been moving him in one direction, and now, quietly, legally, someone inside the machine had touched the brake. The sergeant's call didn't set off alarms, not right away. That's how power worked when it wasn't wearing a uniform. It moved in silence, in paperwork, in names spoken carefully on secure lines. Darnell sat alone again for a while, back in the cell. But the air had changed. The corridor sounds shifted from casual jokes to clipped voices. Doors opened and closed with purpose. An hour later, the cell door clicked. A woman stood there in a plain blazer, no badge visible, hair pulled back tight. She carried herself like someone who didn't ask for permission. "Darnell Price," she said. He stood. "Come with me," she added. Not a command, a decision. They walked past booking, past Lawson's desk, past eyes that tracked Darnell like he was a story they wanted to tell later. Darnell kept his face neutral. In an office near the back, the woman shut the door. She finally turned and said, "My name is Agent Marisol Vega." Darnell's posture didn't change, but his heartbeat, just once, hit harder. Vega studied him. "You're supposed to check in at 7. Darnell exhaled slowly. "I know." Vega's gaze tightened. "You weren't answering. That stop hit our system like a flare." Darnell nodded. "Because it wasn't random." For a moment, the room held the weight of everything unsaid. Then Vega reached into her bag and produced a sealed envelope. She set it on the desk between them like a chess piece. "Your phone's been copied," she said. "Your van's GPS, the live stream footage, the dispatch audio, we have it all. But here's what you need to understand. You are not going to blow this by turning it into a personal fight." Darnell's jaw clenched. Vega's voice softened slightly. Not kindness, but recognition. "I watched the video. I heard him." Darnell said nothing. Vega leaned forward. "You want him fired? I get it, but we're not here to take down one officer. We're here to expose a unit, a pattern, a supervisory chain that's been feeding on probable cause like it's a slot machine." Darnell's eyes stayed on hers. "Then you know what he threatened," Vega nodded once. "Yes," Darnell spoke quietly. "He said he could call my job. He said he could ruin my life with a phone call." Vega's expression hardened. "That's why we do this the way we do it. Evidence, procedure, no shortcuts, because shortcuts are how they get away." She slid the envelope toward him. "You're going to sign a statement, not as an agent, as a citizen who was unlawfully detained and pressured, because when we present this, I want the hearing board to feel the same trap you were in." Darnell stared at the envelope. The seal. The weight. "You don't have to do this," Vega said. "You could walk away. We can keep building without your name." Darnell's voice came out low. "No." Vega waited. Darnell lifted his chin. "I'm tired of patterns." Vega nodded. "Good. Then we're going to use theirs against them." 2 days later, Lawson's report hit the system. Darnell saw it in a secure file room under fluorescent lights that felt too bright for lies. Subject: displayed furtive movements, refused lawful commands, crowd became hostile, possible stolen property transport. There it was again. Crowd. There it was again. Language that turned witnesses into danger, rights into resistance. Vega dropped a printed copy of the livestream transcript beside it. The video showed Darnell with hands visible, narrating his movements, never raising his voice. "They wrote it before they lived it," Vega muttered. Darnell's lips pressed into a thin line. "No, they've lived it. Too many times." Over the next week, the case grew teeth. Not loud teeth, paper teeth, subpoenas, data pulls, body cam logs, dispatch recordings. A quiet analyst in the federal building, an older man who wore thick glasses and spoke like every sentence was a footnote, laid out the first numbers. "Traffic stops by this unit between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. over the past 14 months, he said. 38 stops in the industrial corridor. 34 involved black drivers. Of those, 29 resulted in consent search requests. 21 resulted in searches." Vega glanced at Darnell. "And contraband." The analyst clicked to the next slide. 2 minor findings, a pocket knife, and an unpaid toll ticket. Darnell felt something cold settle in his stomach. Lawson wasn't policing. He was hunting. And the unit wasn't unlucky. It was designed. They interviewed the dock workers next. Keisha came in wearing the same steel-toe boots, but she'd cleaned them until they looked new. She sat with her hands clasped and spoke like someone who'd never expected her mourning to become evidence. "He was talking to Darnell like he was trash," she said. "Like he couldn't possibly be going to work, like work was something only certain people did." A federal attorney nodded. "Did the officer ask why you were recording?" Keisha's eyes flashed. "He didn't ask. He told me to stop, like he owned the street." Another coworker, Manny, admitted his hands had shaken so hard he almost dropped his phone. "I kept thinking, if Darnell moved wrong, that officer was just waiting, like he wanted it." The interviews piled up. So did the complaints. Once the federal inquiry letter hit the department, things started crawling out of cracks people had sealed for years. A barber from the South Side sent in a statement. Stopped twice in 1 month, searched both times, nothing found. A nurse, pulled over after a night shift, asked why she was in that neighborhood. A mechanic, questioned about a toolbox like it was contraband. Different lives, same language. Then there was Evans, the rookie. His name appeared on the stop report as assisting officer. Nothing more. Vega didn't call him at first. She waited, let the pressure build, because she knew the first person who breaks is rarely the one with the most power, it's the one with the least. Evans showed up at a neutral location, an empty conference room in a government building downtown, wearing a plain hoodie and jeans, eyes darting like he was expecting someone to jump out of a closet. He sat across from Vega and Darnell, hands trembling. Vega spoke gently, which was how she got truth. "Officer Evans," she said, "we're not here to hurt you. We're here to ask you what you saw." Evans swallowed. "I saw a stop." Vega didn't move. "And?" Evans' voice cracked. "I saw him decide before he walked up, like he already knew what he wanted to write." Darnell said nothing. He didn't need to. Vega slid a page across the table. "Body cam activation log." Evans' eyes flicked down. "Mine was on." "And Officer Lawson's?" Evans hesitated. Darnell's gaze remained steady like a mirror. Evans whispered, He said his camera was glitching. He told me not to worry about it." Vega's pen moved, quiet, fast. Evans continued, the words finally spilling out now that they'd started. "He told me the corridor was easy work. He said, these guys don't complain because they think nobody listens." Darnell felt his fingers curl, but he kept his hands still. Vega asked, "Who taught him that?" Evans shook his head. "I don't know, but the sergeant laughed, like it was a joke everybody knew." Vega leaned back. There it was. Not just a rogue officer, a culture, a laugh, a nod, a shared belief that certain people didn't count enough to matter. Vega's voice was quiet when she said, "Thank you." Evans' eyes filled. "Am I going to lose my job?" Vega didn't lie. "It depends on what you do now." Evans' breath shook. Darnell finally spoke, low and controlled. "Do the right thing." Evans nodded. I will." That night, Darnell stood in front of a bathroom mirror and looked at his own face for a long time, not because he didn't recognize himself, because he did. He recognized the calm mask, the practiced patience, the way he had to hold himself inside a narrow lane so the world wouldn't punish him for being human. He thought about Lawson's laugh. He thought about the dock workers' phones held steady like fragile shields. He thought about how close it had come to being just another story that disappeared into paperwork. And he thought about what Vega had told him. "We're not here for one officer. We're here for the pattern." He turned off the bathroom light. And in the dark, he promised himself something simple. No more doors left unopened. The hearing wasn't in a courthouse. That surprised people. They wanted robes, gavels, dramatic entrances. They wanted a moment that looked like justice. But the first real reversal happened in a plain municipal building with beige walls and a seal on the door that read, "Office of Professional Standards, Administrative Review Board." Inside there were no pews, no jury box, just a long table, microphones, a few flags in corners, and the faint hum of an air conditioner that sounded like it had been installed during a different decade. Officer Lawson sat at one table with a union attorney, hair slicked back, suit expensive. Lawson's uniform was pristine, creases sharp, shoes polished. He wore his badge like armor. Behind him, a sergeant sat rigid, his supervisor, hands folded so tightly his knuckles looked white. Across the room, city council and a federal liaison took notes with faces that didn't move much. On the side wall, a screen waited, black, silent. Darnell entered quietly. He wore a simple button-down and jeans. No tie, nothing flashy. Still, heads turned. Some recognized him from the viral clips. Some recognized him because people were whispering his name like it had changed meanings. Darnell sat at the witness table, posture straight, hands relaxed. His breathing stayed even. Agent Vega sat behind him not as his representative. Officially, she was only observing, but her presence carried weight anyway. The board chair cleared her throat. "We're here to review the conduct of Officer Daniel Lawson regarding a traffic stop conducted in the industrial corridor on March." The date landed like a stamp. Lawson stared ahead, face unreadable. The chair continued. "We will also consider a pattern analysis of stops and searches conducted by Officer Lawson and members of his unit over the past 14 months. Lawson's union attorney stood. "Madam Chair, we object to the inclusion of pattern analysis. This hearing concerns a single stop." The chair didn't blink. "This hearing concerns professional conduct. Patterns are relevant to professional conduct." The attorney sat. Darnell didn't smile, but something inside him settled, because the first shield had cracked. The chair looked toward Lawson. "Officer Lawson, you wrote in your report that the subject displayed furtive movements and refused lawful commands, and that the crowd became hostile." Lawson's voice was calm, practiced. "Yes, ma'am." The chair nodded. "We will now review video evidence from the scene." The screen lit up. The live stream footage played. The room filled with the sound of Lawson's voice, sharp, mocking, confident. It showed Darnell's hands visible. It showed his slow movements. It showed the dock workers filming, not threatening, just witnessing. It showed the restraint strap. Lawson's face changed by degrees the way a man's face changes when he realizes his private cruelty was never private. The chair paused the video. She looked at Lawson. "Explain to me where, in this footage, the subject is furtive." Lawson swallowed. "It's the totality, his demeanor. The chair's eyes narrowed. "Demeanor is not movement, officer." Lawson's attorney jumped in. "Madam Chair, officers are trained to assess totality, and citizens are protected from bias disguised as totality," the chair replied. She turned to the city council. "Proceed." A different slide appeared. Numbers, charts, stop locations. A quiet analyst spoke. "Stops by Officer Lawson between 2:00 a.m. Shabam and 6:00 a.m. in the corridor, 21. Black drivers, 19. Consent search requests, 17. Searches conducted, 13. Contraband recovered, 1 minor pocket knife. No stolen goods recovered, no theft reports matched." The boardroom held a silence that felt heavy. Then the chair asked softly, "Officer Lawson, why so many searches, why so few findings?" Lawson's jaw tightened. "Proactive policing." The chair leaned in. "Or fishing." Lawson stared at the table. The chair turned toward Darnell. "Mr. Price, please describe the stop in your own words." Darnell spoke without embellishment. He didn't perform outrage. He didn't deliver a speech. He described facts, the spotlight, the refusal to read his documents, the way Lawson spoke louder when the phones appeared, the pressure to sign consent, the threat to call his job. When he mentioned that threat, the union attorney's head snapped up. The chair's voice sharpened. "Officer Lawson threatened to contact your employer?" Darnell nodded. "Yes." The chair looked toward Lawson. "Did you?" Lawson's lips parted, then closed. His attorney whispered urgently, but Lawson answered anyway, voice quieter now. "I said I could." The chair's eyes held his. "And why did you say that?" Lawson's face flushed. "To gain compliance." The chair leaned back slightly, as if letting the words settle into the record like wet concrete. "To gain compliance," she repeated, "by threatening livelihood." Lawson's attorney tried to redirect. "Madam Chair, the officer's intent was..." "Noted," the chair cut in. "And now we'll hear from Officer Evans." Evans walked in like a man approaching a cliff. He wore his uniform, but his shoulders looked smaller inside it. He sat, cleared his throat, and stared at the microphone like it might bite him. The chair asked, "Officer Evans, did Officer Lawson's body camera record the stop?" Evans hesitated. The room waited. Evans spoke, voice cracking. "Officer Lawson said his camera was glitching. He told me not to worry." The union attorney slammed a pen down softly, furious. The chair's gaze turned to Lawson. "Your camera was glitching?" Lawson's voice came out tight. "Yes." The city council asked calmly, "And did you report that malfunction as required by policy?" Lawson's jaw clenched. "Not that night." "Did you disable it?" the council pressed. Lawson glanced at his attorney. The chair's voice was calm, lethal. "Answer the question." Lawson swallowed. "I turned it off." A murmur ran through the room. The chair held up her hand for silence. Then she asked the question that changed the temperature entirely. "Officer Lawson," she said, "did you stop Mr. Price because you believed he was transporting stolen goods? Or because you believed he was a black man driving a cargo van at 5 a.m. and you assumed crime?" Lawson's face went still. He didn't answer. The chair nodded slowly. "Your silence is also evidence." The union attorney stood. "Madam Chair," the chair raised a hand. "Sit." The attorney sat. The chair turned toward Agent Vega. "Federal liaison, you've been observing. Do you wish to enter anything into the record?" Vega stood. Her voice was measured, professional. "Yes," she said. "This board has reviewed a single stop. But our office has obtained corroborating statements from multiple civilians alleging similar conduct by this unit. We have dispatch records and data patterns that suggest a systemic practice of discriminatory stops." The union attorney's face darkened. "This is turning into a federal matter." "It already is," Vega replied quietly. The room stilled. Lawson finally looked up, eyes flashing with fear now. The chair looked down at her notes, then back at Lawson. "Officer Lawson," she said, "this board will make recommendations, but before we do, there is something we need clarified for the record." She turned to Darnell. "Mr. Price," the chair asked, "why were you so familiar with your rights? Why were you so composed?" Darnell paused. This was the moment. Not the courtroom reveal, not a badge flash, a choice. Because if he spoke too soon, the story became about him, and Lawson would claim he'd been set up. If he waited too long, the board would treat him like a lucky victim rather than a prepared witness. Agent Vega's eyes met his just for a second. Darnell nodded, small, almost invisible. He reached into his pocket and placed a folded document on the table. The chair took it, unfolded it, and her expression changed. Not shock like a movie. Shock like gravity. The room leaned forward without meaning to. The chair cleared her throat once. "This is a federal assignment letter." Her eyes lifted to Darnell. "Mr. Price, you are..." Darnell's voice was quiet, clear. "I'm Special Agent Darnell Price," he said. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption, and Civil Rights." The room didn't erupt. It went silent, the kind of silence where you can hear your own blood move. Lawson's face drained so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. The union attorney's mouth opened, then closed, calculations racing behind his eyes. The sergeant behind Lawson shifted, suddenly understanding that the unit's easy work had been a trap closing around them for months. Darnell didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He kept his hands folded. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," Darnell continued. "I came here because what happened to me happens to people without a federal letter in their pocket. And it keeps happening because reports get written clean and cameras glitch at convenient times." He looked directly at Lawson. "Today, it didn't glitch." The chair's voice came out steadier than her eyes. "Thank you, Agent Price." Lawson stared at the table, breathing shallow like he was trying to disappear into wood grain. The chair turned to the record. "This hearing is adjourned pending referral to federal authorities and departmental leadership. Effective immediately, Officer Lawson is placed on administrative leave and the conduct of his supervisory chain is under review. The gavel wasn't dramatic, it was final. The consequences didn't come as fireworks, they came as emails marked urgent, as locked file cabinets. As officers called into offices, one by one, faces tight, jaws clenched. They came as a city attorney's quiet voice saying, "We have exposure." They came as a police chief looking at a chart of stops and realizing the numbers weren't just numbers anymore. They were names, videos, witnesses. A federal agent. Officer Lawson was removed from patrol that same day. No grand perp walk, no public spectacle, just a supervisor meeting him at his locker with 2 other officers present, making it clear the system was documenting itself now. "Turn in your weapon," the supervisor said. Lawson's hand hovered for a moment, then moved like his body was operating without him. His badge went next. The metal hit the desk with a small sound that felt louder than it should have. Lawson stared at it like it belonged to someone else. Darnell watched none of that in person. He sat in a federal conference room while the city's internal machinery began to grind. On the wall was a screen showing the data again. Mapped, categorized, stripped of excuses. Vega stood at the front, pointing to a heat map of stops in the industrial corridor. "Same stretch of road," she said. "Same hours, same language in reports, same requests for consent searches, same camera glitches." A federal attorney asked, "Supervisory knowledge?" Vega clicked to another slide, emails between sergeants, notes from briefing logs, one message in particular that made Darnell's stomach tighten. "Focus on corridor traffic," the sergeant had written. "Lots of easy pulls. Keep your numbers up." Easy pulls. Darnell thought of his wrists against the plastic bench in the cruiser. Easy for whom? They brought in the sergeant next, Lawson's supervisor from the stop. He sat under fluorescent light, hands sweating, trying to look like a man who hadn't understood what he'd been enabling. Vega asked him one question. "Sergeant, how many times have you heard Officer Lawson describe the corridor as easy work?" The sergeant blinked too fast. "I don't recall." Vega slid a transcript across the table, audio from a precinct hallway caught by an unrelated body cam from another officer, Lawson's voice laughing. "Easy work, man. They don't complain. They think nobody listens." The sergeant's shoulders sagged because the system had done what it always did for him, assumed no one would listen, and now everyone was. The disciplinary process moved alongside the federal inquiry like 2 trains running on parallel tracks. The city wanted to look accountable. The feds wanted the truth documented beyond repair. In the public eye, the story sharpened. Not warehouse workers stopped. Not traffic stop controversy. People started saying what it was, a unit built on profiling. Keisha and Manny were interviewed by local news. They didn't speak like activists. They spoke like workers who'd seen something wrong and held their phones steady anyway. "They kept telling us to back up," Keisha said on camera. "We didn't back up. We didn't touch them. We just recorded. Because if we didn't, who would believe him?" The reporter asked, "Did you know he was a federal agent?" Keisha shook her head. "No, we thought he was just Darnell. That's why we filmed, because Darnell should be enough." That line went everywhere. Darnell should be enough. It became a sign at a small community meeting. It became a caption over the live stream clip. It became a quiet punch in the stomach for anyone who'd ever needed a title to be treated like a human being. Darnell didn't attend those meetings. He stayed in the background where agents were supposed to stay. But late at night, alone in his apartment, he watched the clip again. Not to relive it, to make sure he didn't forget why he was doing this. Because the truth wasn't that he'd survived a stop. The truth was that he had survived because people filmed. And that was the part he couldn't control. The day the department announced reforms, the chief stood at a podium with his face set into something like humility. Behind him was a banner that read, "Chicago Police Department, Community Trust Initiative." The words looked clean, new, like they could erase old patterns. The chief spoke carefully. "We are implementing immediate policy changes. All consent searches require documented supervisory approval. Body camera audits will be conducted weekly by an independent review team. Traffic stop demographic data will be published monthly, any officer found disabling recording equipment without cause will face termination. Reporters asked, "Is this because of federal involvement?" The chief didn't deny it. "We welcome oversight. Accountability strengthens policing." It sounded good. Darnell listened from a secure office, arms folded, face neutral. Because he knew, words were tools, too, and tools could build, or they could disguise. What mattered was whether the department could live inside those words when no one was watching. Weeks later, the federal misconduct proceeding concluded with recommendations that carried real teeth. Lawson was terminated, not resigned, not retired, fired. The sergeant was demoted, placed under investigation for failure to intervene and for encouraging quota-like enforcement through numbers. A captain above them was placed on administrative leave for ignoring early warning flags in stop data. And the unit, quietly but decisively, was dismantled. No press release called it dismantling. They called it restructuring. But officers who knew the corridors, who knew the slang, who knew the jokes, it was dismantling. The day after the unit was dissolved, Darnell drove his same cargo van to the warehouse before dawn. Not for work, for closure. He parked near the gate where Keisha and Manny had stood with their phones up, faces lit by a spotlight that had never been meant to protect them. Keisha saw him first, stepping out of her car with a thermos in hand. She froze, then approached slowly. "Darnell," she said, "you okay?" Darnell nodded. "Yeah." Manny walked over too, cautious. "Man, we saw the news." Darnell exhaled. "You saw the truth." Keisha's eyes held his. "We didn't know who you were." Darnell looked past them at the warehouse doors rolling up, the forklifts waking up, the beep, beep, beep of ordinary life returning. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." Manny swallowed. "So, what now?" Darnell's gaze drifted to the street where the stop had happened. "Now. We keep the cameras up. We keep the records clean. We don't let pattern become an excuse for prejudice." Keisha's voice softened. "Does it ever stop?" Darnell thought of the data charts, the hallway laughs, the way Lawson had said crowd like it meant danger. He thought of Evans, the rookie who'd chosen to tell the truth when it could have cost him everything. He thought of Vega's quiet insistence. Evidence, procedure, no shortcuts. "It doesn't stop," Darnell admitted, "but it can change." Keisha nodded slowly. "You really think so?" Darnell looked at her thermos, her boots, the work vest on her seat. "Ordinary things, enough." "I've seen it change," he said. "Not fast, not perfectly, but enough to matter." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. Not a badge, not a threat, not a symbol meant to dominate. Just a number. "If anyone gets stopped like that again," he said, handing it to Keisha, "tell them to document everything. Tell them to write down names, times, words. Tell them not to sign consent under pressure." Keisha held the card like it weighed more than paper. Manny asked, quiet, "And if they're scared?" Darnell's voice was low, honest. "They'll be scared. Being scared doesn't mean they're weak. It means they're human." He stepped back, hands in his pockets, looking at the gate where it had started. Then he added, softer, "And if you see it happening, don't look away. You don't have to fight. You don't have to yell. Just record. Just witness. Sometimes the difference between a story that disappears and a story that changes policy is a steady hand holding a phone." Darnell turned toward his van. He drove away before the sun fully rose, the city still half asleep, the industrial corridor quiet for once. Not because it had become safe overnight, because someone had finally made it visible. Months later, the first public stop data report went live on the city's website. It wasn't perfect, but it existed. And under industrial corridor stops 2 Vas AM, 6 Mas AM. The numbers were different. Lower, cleaner, harder to weaponize. Darnell read it in his office and didn't smile. He just sat back, eyes closed for a moment, letting himself feel something rare. Not revenge, not victory, relief. A cautious, hard-earned hope that accountability could be more than a word on a podium. Have you ever witnessed a stop that felt wrong before anyone had proof it was wrong? What kind of changes do you want to see in your city, in your streets, in the way power speaks to ordinary people? Because sometimes reform starts the same way this did, with someone being treated like they don't matter, and someone else deciding to record anyway.